Thank you, everyone who's been attending the Pagan World Congress 2025, the inaugural event of it so far. And I hope that you have found it enjoyable. I'm going to tell you right now, feel free to ask questions. I am Ed Hubbard, who's also known as Ed the Pagan. And if that kind of doesn't tell you my bias and my statements, nothing else will. And to be honest with you, Ed the Pagan starts out as a First Amendment story or a media story. And we're going to go over the First Amendment from a pagan point of view, not a Democratic point of view, not a Republican point of view, not a libertarian point of view, but from a pagan point of view. And it isn't just going to be American. And we're also going to discuss it as it pertains to other countries. The First Amendment is a very important aspect. And one of the things that makes this event possible is that we still continue to have First Amendment rights here in the United States and in a part of the world. So here we go. And I'm going to share this with you. What is the First Amendment of the United States? It says Congress shall not make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the first thing. Or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. 2, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Now, we've had a lot of South Africans here today. We've had Europeans. We've had Philippines. And this is the Article 18, 19, and 20, which is the division of the United Nations right. And it has everyone has a freedom of thought, which goes beyond freedom of speech. And we have a freedom of opinion, which includes, the idea of it. And everyone has a right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and no one may be compelled to belong to an organization. So there we go. And so there we go in that. So there we go. The 3 parts of the Constitution, and it's in 3 different sections on the UN Charter. And the first part, let me go ahead and deal with some of the ideas behind it. This is going to be practical. This is going to be high and mighty. I'm not going to try telling you, oh, it's so great we have freedom of speech, because we don't have full freedom of speech. There's always the argument about fire in a crowded place. You're not supposed to use your free speech to cause harm. And that's not really free speech then, right? It has a curtail. And so we have things like you can't threaten people, or at least you're not supposed to. And you're not allowed to do a number of things. So we're talking about reasonable accommodations. One of the biggest problems we have in the United States is the freedom of religion. We never really defined a religion in the Constitution. And one of the ways you can change the way you interpret the Constitution is by changing the meaning of the words underneath it. So who gets to define what a religion is? Absolutely. Who gets to define it? And that is the hardest part. Does it mean I get to, right now, most of the Supreme Court justices say, I get to define my own religion. And I get to just say what it is, as long as it harms no one else, in the sense of does not impinge on other people's rights to their religion. That's what it's supposed to be. I mean, I'm allowed to say things. Thomas Jefferson said it best. It says, your rights end at the tip of my nose. Meaning, you can have all the rights in the world. You can have any religion you want. You can have any practices you want. You can do anything you want to, as long as it doesn't harm another person. And now we know this is not exactly true. But let's for the argument's sake say that it is true. So freedom of religion or the establishment thereof means that the government can't go in there and saying, you are going to be Christian. So this is now an attempt in our government to do so with anti-Christian bias and everything else. Or I can't go into my workplace and say, you can't work here in my workplace unless you're pagan. Not allowed to do that. I can show my bias. I can try to willow out in other ways. But if I intentionally not hire people because of their religious status, technically I'm not allowed to. But I am allowed to censor it inside of my organization. So let's talk about what's free is not free speech. Facebook, which you're watching this on, or Discord, which you might be seeing this on, or YouTube, which you are very much seeing this on, all state one thing. They are not public utilities. They are not the United States government. They have no legal requirement to offer free speech. The fact that they do offer the speech that they're allowed to censor and authorize whatever they choose to do so. They do. And there's been a lot of lawsuits that they're trying to change it, which is different from the radio airways until 1984 had a fair use doctrine. You could present both sides. They took that away under Reagan, which gave birth to Rush Limbaugh and a lot of the very conservative speakers. And the left just couldn't keep up. I mean, other people that I've seen a lot of other great speakers. So the shows came up. What brought the talk show was another form of free speech, and I continue to practice, and you should too, is podcasting. So from a pagan point of view, we are only limited in our free speech by our ability to spend so. It's often attributed to Ben Franklin, but it was Andy Warchuk that said, freedom of the press means you have to own a press. Do you own a press? And obviously we do. We've been buying into press for 30 years. We did Pagan's Tonight Radio. We've done magazines. We've done podcasting. We've broken into Roku television, and we continue this process. And the Pagan World Congress is our multi-tiered, multi-platform presentation of the facts that you need to know. So freedom of religion and the freedom, not to establish it, but we do have a form to establish a religion so that it's legally recognized. Now, you can always say it's my rights, and you can show in court, and somebody discriminates you because of your personal religion. You have a large path to prove that they violated your personal religion and that they were aware of it. So they can't violate your religion if they're not aware of it. Awareness is a distinct part of it. And this is what we're seeing being buried. When we go into the closets, when we don't talk about our faith, when we don't go into the public square and not practice our faith, we are often told, then when they get violated, our rights get violated, we have nothing to do. So we don't do any education. We don't prepare. So when you say, I need Samhain off. Oh, what's that? Halloween. Oh, no, you don't. That's just a kid's holiday. No, Samhain means this, and I'm a pagan. Suddenly is oftentimes a trigger to a conversation that people don't want. If they are not aware of what it is and not aware that it's a religious right, then it's very hard for them to do so. So then you go, well, what church do you belong to? This is a crucial part of that First Amendment right in modern America. Argue against it all you want, and that's fine. You don't have to practice it, but if you want to enforce it, you need to get your church charter or not-for-profit charter for your church in your state, in your name, and in your bylaws. You must state your practices. Now, in the Correllian tradition, one of the biggest things we wrote into was the right of confessionals. If it's not there, you can't prove it. So that when we go into court, somebody says, well, they confess to you. Well, to a priest, only the Catholic Church and the Episcopalians have that in their charter. Baptists do not. There's been a number of pastors that have been forced to go public. If you don't have it in your charter, then you don't have it in your charter. And then they can say, well, how can you prove that? How can you enforce it? So your bylaws, whenever anything violates your religious, they're going to want to see what do you believe. And the way that they believe that in our system of legalisms is by filing your not-for-profit charter with your state. Do you go on to a 501c3? That's for tax purposes. It has some value. It has a lot of value to some people, but you can go ahead and get that as well. The second thing, once you have a church charter and you say, I'm a minister, can you prove it? And this is very important to me. And this is probably one of the biggest things I want to say. How can you be a individual who believes in your church? I'm going into my wallet. I didn't pre-stage this. I have one of these. It's very important. Number 4. And that's an ID. I have an ID that identifies me as a church member, as a clergy member, and how to contact my church. And so that when they ask for ID, at least I have that to present. If your legal church is not creating IDs, that's okay. They're not forced to. No one's forcing them to. But if you want to stand up as free speech warriors of religion, prove that you have one. I know. Terrible legalisms, and maybe you don't want this. I don't care. If you plan to go toe-to-toe with the United States government, the IRS, the hospitals, prisons, whatever it is that you want to, and our people are fighting these battles. Donna Donovan really is Appalachian Prison Ministries fights this all the time. The right to get identity. Patrick McCollum years ago, who has a movie out, when I first started media, was about that idea of the chaplainship, and they've all worked to change that. In order to get recognized, you need to have a legal body or a legal place to do so. And this is something we've led the Karelians. Not only Karelians have the main one, Karelian Nativist Tradition Church Incorporated, they have dozens of other bodies that are independent or decentralized within their organization so that they could all express themselves. And a number of them even have their own independent 501c3s. I look at Reverend Pagan, whose temple is its own 501c3, separate of the main tradition. And I think a lot of groups need to do that. So go out there and get your charter, regardless if you belong to a tradition, talk to them about how to develop it. I know ATC has development tools. I know that a lot of different groups, the Simple Witchcraft is Christopher Penzak's people have ways of incorporating. So go out and do that. Get either an independent charter or get one with your tradition. Protect yourself. 2, what? Get an ID. Remember, I just showed it to you. Create IDs. If you're not carrying an ID in this next phase, you're making yourself extremely vulnerable. So you've now got your charter. Now you've got your temple. Okay, and I see. This is ask question. It's very hard to start and keep it in place. Yeah, it's keeping it separated. Helps. So those are the first 2 things you can do. So now you've established your credentials because you can't do so. And I once listened to a Christian Right gentleman. Didn't know he was Christian Right when I first heard him, but I found out later. And he says, we might have a constitutional crisis on our hands. He says, what if, and as we see it, we see these LGBTQ and other rights that we see that we want are made into church doctrine, that they are part of their religious doctrine. And these groups of 3 to 6 people all form their churches across the United States. We could be seeing 10,000 of them who have this in there. And then when we push back against these rights, and this was said in 2024, and when we push back at these rights, when we push away at these rights for LGBTQ, we may be facing a religious argument of these people who say they have a right to practice that. So get your charter really strong. Be clear on what you believe, and then put it into your bylaws. Make sure they're filed. And if it's not filed, propose them. And provide the beginnings of identification. It could be a letter. It could be a number of things. So that's the next step. In order to maintain it, so that's the right of religion and the right of freedoms. You can prove that you have a religion. So it may sound crazy, but in order to work with the First Amendment, you have to have proof of religion. Now, once you've got that charter, you get to do another thing, and it's a completely separate set of rights. One that I fundamentally remember. I'm probably one of the First Amendment best warriors in the country, and we've already told you we're looking at these sort of rights, and that is the freedom of press, to have a press, and the right of free speech. So the right of free speech is that you have the right to say anything in the public square. And we've limited that with the Supreme Court of not being disruptive. You can't disturb the peace. Now, that's a very thin line. But you're allowed to speak in public spaces and independently and in private spaces on your own about your free speech. It doesn't protect you from the consequences of your free speech, as people are learning. But you have a right to it. Now, that is limited by what people have access. give access. Yes, filing can be rejected. Don't give up. Yeah, sometimes the filings can be rejected. Ultimately, there are great attorneys. We have Lady Liberty League. There's going to be a lot more resources. When this comes out, we're going to do a lot more resources through the Pagan World site. We're going to offer a way of helping people because I really do believe in this. So remember, I believe in decentralization. And so now we have the right to do so. Remember, we don't have an unlimited right to free speech in other people's spaces. We do in our own. So if you rent a theater, you have a right to say whatever you want in that theater. If you're outside in front of the theater, you have some rights depending on what the noise laws are. You can go into a park. You can go ahead and do so. You can be as noisy as any of these creatures are. I'm thinking about going to Salem this year, seeing how that works, but you can say things within that public space of the courtroom. They can't censor you if they're a government, but they are a private body. They have a right to do so. And so that's very important. This Congress is very important. It's being put on. I pay Restream. If Restream were to suddenly stop this for political reasons, I could sue them because I have a contract with them. It's not true of Facebook if they decide to cut me off suddenly. Then I don't have a right to sue them. I really don't. Or Threads or Bear, everything else. So remember that. But your server company and your website companies can't really discriminate for you starting pagan sites just for religious reasons. So there's a lot of reasons to do that. So understand where you can. But the press is a different component from the free speech. The free press means we are allowed to take our free speech and put it into writing, into videos nowadays, and all of those energies. So yeah, go ahead and look at that. So you have your free speech issue, but the press is a different issue. It has rights in and of itself. So, and you can start a press from your church. I have a number of times. I have the Correllian Press Corps, Magic TV, Pagan World, Danville TV. You have that one of the things that emerged is something called citizen press. Blogs are that and everything else. Once upon a time, and we worked in that field too. Remember, getting on CNN, getting on MSNBC, getting on these mainstream places does wonders in getting our message across. And don't stop working that. Press releases. You're allowed to send out press releases. I'm still in a battle now for 2 years with a press release company that refused our press releases. And I'm trying to prove that they are a utility. I'm not winning. Because there's a lot of Christian presses out there. There's a lot of people who do so. And we're allowed to have our own. So one of the things going to emerge out of the Congress is that we're creating our own press release service. We'll talk more about that when I develop with the AI tomorrow, but we're going to have to create our own press release services. But we have a right to press. We have a right to wear badges. I didn't bring my badges downstate. And we're allowed to go in there and we're allowed to be our own press. There's a couple of things you need to do. You have to say, if you're going to be part of the church has to say in the bylaws, we hereby authorize a press corps. We've done that. So we go ahead and do that. And then you form your press corps. And once you do so, you can send letters to do that. One of the perks of it, I've gotten into some great conventions as press. I've been reporting it. And you have to report. You have to show your blogs. You have to show your videos. You have to show your podcast. All these make you eligible to form a press. And I think the pagan community should, as a whole, form an alliance. I know Janet Callahan of Spiral Moon Grove is trying to do a pagan newswire. I know Jason Pitzelwater made a really strong attempt at doing so. And so that's the second thing to do. So in order to be freedom of the press, you have to have a press, and you have to have part of your component of your ministry practice like reading Science Monitor, having a pagan newspaper, having a pagan magazine, having a blog. So have your now legal body create doing so. And if you don't have a 501c3, you don't have to worry about 501c3 concerns about being too political. Spiral Moon Press, they're a press. They've got radios, they got everything. They're great. Janet Callahan is leading the effort there. I think they're a great organization. I think that they're one of the ones that are necessary. And yeah, that makes you Spiral Moon Press. It is out of Michigan. Go to Spiral Moon, and that's a great thing. That's one of them. But you can form one out of your own organization. Corellians have one. Pagan World's going to have an alliance, I think. You can form your own press, and that gives you authority in your body. So Southern Fire says, I'm more concerned with how we educate ourselves and how we handle protecting our rights as citizens and how pagans can sustain communities and take care of our own kids, elders, and dead. That's a great issue, and I would love to talk about how we do that, but I'm not an educator. We have a number of people talking about education. I think there's a lot of people in the education field. I am hoping at some point to start my next school pretty quickly here. Which school continues. It's on its own trajectory. They've taken over. But I'm looking at, again, another school, another system of education. The way the education works, it's all going to change. So it's really going to be a big change. But one of the things you can do is begin forming locally. So you've got your press, you've got your paperwork, you have a right to say things. Once you have that in place, you can go to your city council and say, hey, I want to do one of those prayers and see how that fights. And there's organizations that can help you through this. If you're not investing in the Lady Liberty League or the Wild Hunt, which is a newspaper, do so. So now you can go in and become part of the community. Now, I didn't say it didn't have consequences. Discrimination, bias, all of that's still there, and you have to fight it. But now at least you have a legal grounds to deal with it, because you have your main charter, you have the charter saying you can have a press, and you can have free speech. All of this is covered into it, and that's Articles 18 and 19 of the UN. But let's talk about the last one, which is assembly. If you're a religion, and this pertains about it, if you're a religion, you have assemblies. In fact, it's required by some states that you meet at certain times a year, and you have a right to assembly. The government is not supposed to prevent you from assembling. Now, they do have some ways of doing so. If you want to use a campground, then, and it's a public campground, you may have to get a permit, and these permits can become difficult. If you're a park, you must be able to get a permit. And the way they can discriminate against that is saying that it's not for the public safety. Then you can argue. If you have these sort of conditions, you have an organization who can then come in and say, well, why? You can then take it necessarily, if you had to, court. One of the greatest stories is that tonight, we're at 8 o'clock, you're going to have Phyllis Carrot. Phyllis Carrot, the lady, once went, really, must have a business license. Wow. That's possible. I mean, to do certain things, you may have to do more legal requirements. And what it is that 1993 Parliament, we wanted to do a big ritual out on right by Palmer House out in Grant Park. I was working backstage, as everybody knows the story there. But Phyllis Carrot eventually would get to the Cardinal Bernardine, one of my favorite cardinals. He really had a lot up for Chicago. He's Catholic. He had all those features. But he was also very much a person of the people. And he would teach us a lot of it. He went to the mayor and says, can we do anything? And the city put an emergency procedure that had 400 or 500 people going out to a full moon ritual at the Parliament of World Religions. We got our sort of our moral equivalency. And we got that because Phyllis Carrot used the power of the press, her power of her religion, and her power of networking. And it overrode the park's permit process to give the city to park because it was the right thing to do. So listen tonight to Phyllis Carrot. I think this is going to be one of the more important speeches we see. I'm very much looking forward to it. And there it is. So the third part is the right to assembly. And this is the most difficult one. We've talked about parks. We've talked about permits. Pagan Pride takes a lot of advantage of this. And now we're going to have to look towards security of our events and look into the rules of our events to prevent people from using the open access of these things. But if you rent a church, if you rent a physical unit, you have a right to limit who comes in. And also the right to protest. So 7 days from now will be the largest protest in the United States. I don't think it's anything that's going to match. It's called No King's Day. And already the government and the leading individuals who are a part of it are coming to class, it's because the freedom of speech allows for it. Hate rallies and Hamas, they're lying about the entire thing, but they're trying to get the right to use military force against our right of assembly. The right of assembly is essential to our religion, to all religions, the right to meet and not be restricted. Now, these permits and other methods to do so, and you may have to fight them. Yeah, maybe. You may have to find that. So the other thing that you need to do now is to create identity, make sure you have it. Freedom of speech allows you to do so. And the more you want to enforce it, the more you must take on legal considerations. I am a fully recognized member of the press in so many places. I've done an official press work from the Parliament of World Religions. I was the first pagan reporter of the Parliament of World Religions. And they were not discriminating against me because of my religion. They discriminated against me because I was new media. And I went and they said, really, this is how this is how my group is communicating. They gave me my permit. I have been recognized by McCormick Center. I've gone to many conventions. I've gone to many events. I've applied for them. I've been, I did some freelance with AP. So building your credentials is very important. For me, it was press, making sure that I do events of press and report it and always have a way to communicate, always have a podcast, always have a blog, always have a YouTube channel. So that's very important. And it can get you to some places. If you want to go to a convention that you're covering and that you're writing articles about, let's say you're an arts and crafts person, and that one of the things you do in your press is arts and crafts. You can apply to that convention to become a reporter. So I'm going to finish up with this last piece I think that is essential to our First Amendment rights. First of all, practice them. Practice them, practice them. You must not shrug away. You have a right to speak. You have a right to speak in the public square. And no one has a right to stop you from speaking in spaces that speaking is allowed. And this includes, you can be told not to talk about your religion at work as long as nobody else. So if nobody else has the right, you don't have the right. Everybody has the right. If one person has the right, everybody has the right. So feel free to speak out. Apply for things, that. So get your paperwork together, get your ID together, get your press together, get your press passes together. And then you also have that too, when you do assemble for various reasons, you have that sort of extra addition. And the right to assembly means everything from just, coming together at a park for a picnic or just meeting at your house, church houses, to having renting a stadium and thousands of people come. The largest event I've ever put on is probably Witches Balls, which were 400 people, which I had a right to. All of this is, hello, everybody. And all of these are about your First Amendment. The First Amendment for Pagan is just most essential. And if you want to practice it, you need to protect it. Lady Liberty League needs to be financed. I am not a member of Lady Liberty League. This commercial, I come to them, I am not actually involved with them. I have nothing to do with them in the way they organize. I'm impressed by them, and I've seen them manage. Have I done radio work with them? Yes, of course. We've done lots of promotion for them, but Lady Liberty League is super important. And in this day and age, Wild Hunt Blog has made itself a very important part of free press. So supporting Wild Hunt Blog, and people know I've had my issues, but they've done an amazing job of maintaining this authority in our community. Find other ways to support other people. Pagan World Congress. We're going to be much more of what is going to become a great community activist site as it emerges out of this. So I want to thank everything. I want to thank all of you. And so this is your list. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion are tied together. Without freedom of speech, you can't have freedom of religion. Without freedom of press, you have no way of getting your message out beyond your own circles. You have a right to your own free press. That means you have a right to free press. Everyone has a right to sovereign press. That's distribution and getting out there. Once you do so, in order to secure your religious rights, file the paperwork necessary in your state. It may be tough, it may be difficult, it may be easy. In the state of Illinois, it's so easy. But file it to have it. And in that, having your bylaws and in your beliefs written out so that you can prove that you can enforce them in a court of law. Next, create IDs for yourselves. I mean, IDs are just what they are. It's what people believe. They're the Gregor. But if you have an ID with identifiable features, it will give some people pause enough that you may be able to get out of the situation. Some people will ignore it. Some people it has no meaning to. But if you go to a hospital or a funeral parlor or go to a scene or want to get into a prison, this will help you. They're very easy to make today. I mean, unfortunately, it used to be really hard, but it is easy. Once you do that, have your church form a press group, which means it has the right to press, set up a blog, set up a YouTube channel, DM me if you want to know exactly what to do, and then create a name for your press and begin the process of creating IDs, press passes, and answering and utilizing that press pass. For assembly, assemble as often as you can. We need to go from global. Byron's talking about circles on the ground. Local, Byron Ballard talks about circles on the ground. Reverend Don's going to talk about metaphysically. Think metaphysically or multiversally and act locally. So we can act local. Being press is an act of the local. Now that you can do this again, and when it comes to election time, candidates and reporters, the more you have an active voice, the more it is. So if you don't do anything else, even if you don't want to do any of that stuff, you just want to do a podcast, you just want to write, practice your voice. Do not let it be shut down. Don't let anybody's voice be shut down. Now, do we convince people how to do so? That's a different story. But today, the question is, how do we protect our rights? And that is by practicing them and doing these few legal things which you can argue against and makes it part of the system and makes it easy to identify, all those types of ideas. But when it comes down to brass tacks and you need them, you'll be glad that you have them. Build your rights. Protect yourself. Wear armor. Be loud. Build your voice. Become part of the pagan voice. And blessed be.